Okay, today we're talking about a new lens, the Sigma 28-105 f2.8 DGDN Art, and this one's for Sony E-mount, but I believe there's a Lumix version as well. Sigma did lend me this lens to make this review. They didn't pay me any money to make this. They don't get to see it before it goes up. This lens goes back to Sigma when I'm done, but this video does have an actual sponsor, and that's Storyblocks. Let's start by going over just a few basic specs on the lens. So it weighs 990 grams, or at least the Sony version does. And for comparison, Sigma Zone 24-105 f4 is 885 grams. So the interesting thing is that it's not that much heavier than the f4, and they accomplished that by one, a new optical formula, but also not getting that 4mm on the wide side. Also, for a 105mm lens, it's not stabilized. That's something to consider. It is an external zoom, but at 105, it's not stabilized. Where often 24-105's f4s are often stabilized. So just keep that in mind. Let's go over some of the buttons and switches it has here. First off, in the hands, it feels really good. I like the texture on it. And speaking of that zoom ring that I just moved, it's nice. It's well dampened, smooth, no complaints. You'll notice that there is a zoom lock switch over on this side. Now this is more for storage, or for if you hold the lens upside down, it's not gonna break free, but you can still break through that lock by just zooming it. There's two function buttons on the lens, one here and then one over here by the AF/MF focus selector. And there's also a switch for clicking and declicking the aperture ring. And the aperture ring also has a feature I like, which is a lock to help you keep the lens in the A position if you want to control it on the camera without it accidentally, going to f4, and then you're wondering why you can't change the iris on your camera. It has that. So basically every little switch and button that you could want on a lens is here, and the front filter diameter is 82mm. So yeah, overall, no complaints with the lens. Feels good in the hand. It's nice, seems well made. There is a difference with the manual focusing though. If you're familiar with some of the more recent Sigma lenses, I've often had trouble describing them. I would say they're not completely linear, but you can move it precisely enough that you can get around that, especially for photographers. Normally you'd be able to dial in the manual focus because the nonlinear response means that when you move it slowly, it focuses slowly. Then when you move it quickly, it focuses quickly. But I found that just by moving it naturally, I always felt very precise. Sony lenses often work on sort of a medium quick speed, but they're linear. The acceleration is the same all the way through. Now, I believe you can probably program this on a Lumix camera to be linear, nonlinear, whatever you want. But on the Sony cameras, we're stuck with just how the lens performs naturally, which is different on this lens. There is no slow speed anymore. It's sort of like, even if you turn it quite slowly, it still feels more like a medium speed. Medium to quick are your two options now. And I'd say this is maybe the worst thing about this, and it's definitely a step in the wrong direction. Because if you're not going to be linear, then at least give me that super slow, super precise thing. If you're going to be non-linear, then why make everything, so now it's just non-repeatable and not as precise. So that's a con. And again, for the Lumix version, it might be fine, but it definitely feels like a little bit of a downgrade compared to a Sony lens, and possibly even to the, super long throw previous Sigma ones. You still have a long throw, but yeah, I don't like it quite as much. But the ring does turn nicely in the hand. The autofocus is improved though compared to some of those older Sigma lenses, because this is now using their high response linear actuator. So they're, linear, super fast autofocus motors, which on the last couple Sigma lenses that are also using these is terrific. They work excellently and no complaints at all. So autofocus will be fine, just some nitpicks about manual focus. And the minimum focus distance is the same on this lens at the wide end as it is on the telephoto, which is 0.4 meters or 1.31 feet, which means that you're going to get much closer reproduction on the telephoto end than you will on the wide end. And the reproduction is actually pretty good. So this is at 28mm, and if we punch right in, we can see that it is quite sharp, which is good, means we don't have any issues with minimum focus. But look at the difference if we zoom to 105. You should get pretty good reproduction. It's not, full macro, obviously, but it's pretty tight. It's one of the tighter zoom lenses I've seen for photographing this Rubik's Cube. And again, we're getting incredible sharpness right there in the center, even at the absolute minimum focus. I also have a couple somewhat real-world examples of me testing both the autofocus and, again, close focusing. This was at 105 mil, and I was kind of tracking this bumblebee around, and I was really impressed by the sharpness. I mean, just look at all these little tendrils on the dandelion. And even the bumblebee just looks great. And I have one more example. Again, incredibly sharp. You can see the full frame here. This will also give you a little bit of an idea of the bokeh, which we'll talk about again in a minute, but pretty clean standard bokeh, nothing too, it's not really swirly or anything weird going on, just pretty standard in the background. But just look, the sharpness is incredible. Although I do wish on this one that I got both wings sharp, but that's not really a lens issue, that is a skill issue, because if there's one thing I'm not, it's an insect photographer. So if I really needed images of a sharp bumblebee, I probably would have been better off just downloading them from Storyblocks, the sponsor of today's video, a stock media platform that offers unlimited downloads of diverse and high quality content for one predictable subscription cost. But Storyblocks offers a whole lot more than just bumblebee media. In fact, their library houses over 1 million HD and 4K video files, images, and motion graphics templates. And jokes aside, those motion graphics have actually saved me time on previous projects, especially now that they added DaVinci Resolve templates. Much better than my previous and tedious method of making those graphics in Photoshop and then animating them in the Edit tab using keyframes. Plus, anything you download from Storyblocks is 100% royalty-free with clear-cut licensing, so you can focus on creating, not worrying about usage rights. The platform is incredibly easy to use, and the library is frequently restocked with commissioned content based on customer demand to ensure you'll have access to files that are not only high quality, but fresh and diverse. So to get started with unlimited stock media downloads at one set price, head to storyblocks.com/undone or click the link in the description. Okay, let's finish off the focus section by talking about parfocalness and focus breathing. In the parfocal department, which is the lens's ability to focus at one end of the zoom range, and then when you zoom to the other, to maintain focus without needing to refocus. So on this one, you can see, okay, we're in focus here, and this is focused on the wide end, but if we go to the 105 end, it's not quite sharp anymore. However, if we refocus on the 105 end, and then zoom out to 28, it actually maintains its sharpness pretty well. Again, not perfect, it's okay. Let's give it a 6 out of 10 for parfocalness. The autofocus is pretty fast though, so as long as you're not crash zooming like some episode of The Office, you can probably allow the autofocus to bridge the gap in the lack of parfocalness on this lens, if that makes sense. And then lastly, focus breathing was extremely well controlled in this lens, which was great to see because, even if you use a Sony camera with focus breathing compensation, usually it doesn't work with third-party lenses. So you want the lens to have really good focus breathing control. Now I'm sure I'm showing a clip of it on the screen now, but for those of you that don't know, focus breathing is where the field of view changes as you focus. It almost seems like you're zooming instead of focusing. But this lens, the frame barely changes at all, so that's fantastic. Now let's move on to Bokeh. This is at 28mm at f2.8. You can see we do have some cutting in the corners, and if we look at some of these orbs in the center here, they look quite nice. You will notice something that's interesting about how many iris blades there are, and we'll get more into that in a minute, but this is a 12-bladed iris, which is uncommon for Sigma. 28mm, though, they're not going to be that luxurious, but at 105, we get a better look at them here. Even up in the corners, they do quite well. There is a bit of that onion ringing going on, but the outer membrane isn't too strong, so that's nice. Not the best I've seen, but certainly passable. And again, one more shot so we can see the extent of the cat's eye, which isn't too bad at all, which is why in those other shots, you didn't really have that much of a swirly look because the bokeh, for better or worse, is a little bit sterile on this lens. So it's not going to be distracting, but it's also not going to add anything, magical to your shots if that's what you're looking for. And then if we stop down, we can get a look at that 12-bladed iris. Now, 12-bladed thing is interesting. Sigma doesn't really make lenses with 12 blades, and they don't plan on doing so in the future, I was told in my briefing. This is sort of a one-off that was necessary for this optical design to maintain some other characteristics that they wanted. But it does create interesting sun stars. You'll notice that instead of getting twice as many spikes with ones in between these, you get fewer, stronger, thicker, more distinct spikes sticking out of the sun. It's one of the interesting characteristics about an even-bladed iris, especially when you're at 12 blades of this one here. So, this could be some interesting character if that's something that you wanted, if you wanted to show the sun in your shots. But while we're here, let's talk a little bit about flare. So you can see on certain angles, it is incredibly well controlled. These blacks are super black and rich. You can get a little bit of, ghosting and artifacts depending on how you let it enter the frame. These sun stars are pretty wild though. This is sort of a worst case scenario where you shoot in a really strange angle. If you were, I don't know why you would shoot this, but I just wanted to show the sort of extent of the combination of the 12 blades mixed with flare, combining at the worst possible nexus. This is what you get. But if you're shooting like this, put your hood on. It's good. The flare is okay. They're usually pretty well controlled, but these sun stars are wild, and it's kind of just a fun little characteristic about this lens. And it might end up being a one-off that it's like, oh, what's that lens that has the 12-bladed iris from Sigma? It's this one, and it might be the only one. Now let's talk a little bit about LoCA, longitudinal chromatic aberration, which is the fringing that occurs on the foreground and background out of focus areas that can usually only be resolved by stopping down. So if we want to shoot wide open, we want a lens that has good control over this type of chromatic aberration. And if we zoom in right here, first of all, we can see that the frame looks predominantly black and white, which is great news, because otherwise you would see, opposite colors like pink and green or red and blue, but I don't really see anything. I mean, if I get really close, I can see the faintest little tinge, but this is incredibly well controlled LoCA. Some of the best I've ever seen, honestly. Like that is absurdly good at 28 millimeters. So that's fantastic. And this is wide open. And at 105 mil, this is the full shot. And I can maybe see it a little bit worse at 105, but again, like this is really good. And so if I zoom out, yeah, you can see right here, a little bit of bluish there and a little bit of reddish there. But, we're magnified at this level. It looks black and white to me. And at the wide end, I can barely see anything. So really, really, really good results as far as chromatic aberration is concerned. Here we can take a look at distortion and vignetting. I have no lens corrections applied, but there will be some, obviously, that can improve this, probably fix it completely. So I wouldn't worry about it too much, but if you want to see what it looks like with no corrections on, there is a little bit of vignetting I can see in the corners. We're at 28 millimeters at f2.8, and we are also seeing some barrel distortion. And if we zoom to 105, it actually kind of flips. There's a little bit of pin cushion distortion now, but the vignetting mostly cleans up. If we go over here, we can take a look at the sharpness, but also, again, some vignetting. And at 28, I do see a little bit in the corners. Again, this is uncorrected. And if we look in the center here and zoom in, very, very, very sharp. And as we move out toward the edge of the frame, it does fall off a little bit. I saw the MTF charts of this lens, and comparatively, it performs similar on the MTF charts to Sigma's 24 to 70 f2.8, which is a very sharp lens, and noticeably better than Sigma's 24 to 105 f4. And center sharpness is not an issue. Just on the wide end, it does fall off a little bit in the corners. Let's take a look at the 105. Again, very, very, very sharp in the center. Let's see how it does out toward the edge. At 105, the sharpness doesn't seem to fall off as badly, but still, this result is excellent. The sharpness is excellent throughout the frame. Not as good as some primes and stuff like that, but for 28 to 105 zoom, there's nothing really to complain about here when it comes to sharpness. And that really is the big question, isn't it? Because this is sort of a strange focal length. 28 to 105 f2.8, which makes it, a bit bigger and heavier than lenses that don't quite have that focal range, but not quite the reach of a 24 to 105 f4. So it's definitely somewhere in the middle. I thought it was going to be more compromised than it is, and it isn't at all. It's like without hardly any flaws. I guess what it comes down to is that if you find this combination of features in a lens useful, one that goes from 28 to 105 with a healthy barrel extension, or one that has an aperture range of f2.8 to f22, then I can assure you that this lens is of top quality and that I think you'll be happy with it. It passed all my tests with flying colors. It is very sharp, has like no focus breathing. The chromatic aberration is fantastic on it. It truly is just a terrific lens. So it really just comes down to if it's a lens that you can make use of, and if so, I think you're going to be quite pleased with it. All right, I'm done. Actually, hold that thought. Editor Gerald here with a minor correction about the longitudinal chromatic aberration. I heard from some of my fellow lens reviewers that they were experiencing more LoCA than what I showed here in my tests. So I went back to try to recreate it, and while I couldn't recreate it using my test method conventionally, I was able to create some more striking LoCA results by following what they did. Here is one that's similar to what I showed you. I did the test again, and as you can see, really, really good. I see the faintest bit of maybe like a green color this way and the faintest amount of sort of a purple color this way. But if we take a shot like this is at 28 mil at a very low angle and jack up the ISO, then you can see it a little bit worse, a little bit more green, a little bit more of the magenta coloring down here. It's still really minor though, which is why I usually like to say you should zoom out and then determine if the overall image, looks black and white or if you can see chromatic aberration. At 105, it's a little bit worse, just like we saw with my original test. We can see the blue and the red, but again, it fades out right away in both directions. And in this example, again, a little bit worse, but it fades out in both directions. But when zoomed out, it still looks They both still look pretty much black and white. And again, this is accentuated by getting a really low angle and then either shooting underexposed and cranking it up in post, or by shooting with a much higher ISO. But I wanted to show you why I didn't complain about the chromatic aberration in the first place too much. This is my recent review of the 85 G Master 2 from Sony compared to the original G Master. And this is chromatic aberration that's worth pointing out, and differences between the two. But look at this shot, and then look at the 28 to 105 zoomed to a similar level. This is not a problematic chromatic aberration. Once again, there's the 85 G Master. And if we compare it to the RE Signature Prime that I did from that, best lens I've ever used video that I made, even it has a minor amount of chromatic aberration. But once again, look at the one on the left. This is the Signature Prime. And then now look at the 28 to 105 at 28 millimeters. It's better than the Signature Prime. So that's why I said it's essentially flawless optically. So while I admit that I definitely underestimated how bad you can make the LoCA look by applying certain principles to it, I do like to keep my test results standardized across the board, which is why I didn't test it at high ISOs with a low angle. But even at high ISOs with a low angle, I wouldn't call this LoCA problematic. Okay, enough rambling about chromatic aberration. Back to that funky outro.